In 2018, Riot made the most controversial decision in its history. A single patch was enough to wipe out an entire class of champions. What seemed like a minor gold adjustment turned into a complete cataclysm in the bot lane ecosystem. Mages, assassins, and bruisers took the place of ADCs, and they wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. But how did this happen? What exactly did Riot change? And why was this decision upheld despite the backlash? This was the most traumatic episode for bot lane mains, patch 8.11. The patch that changed everything and nearly killed ADCs forever. Can you imagine a game where the marksman role simply doesn't exist? That's exactly what happened in June 2018. Patch 8.11 went live, and within days, ADCs, historically the backbone of bot lane, were swallowed by a void of uselessness. But this catastrophe didn't happen out of nowhere. In fact, it was provoked line by Riot Games themselves. Let's go back in time. Back then, League of Legends faced a classic problem: lack of diversity in the bot lane. ADC champions dominated every match, both in pro play and solo queue. Tristana, Jinx, Kog'Maw, Caitlyn. It was always the same story. So Riot decided to step in, but instead of small adjustments, they went for one of the most radical patches in the game's history. They overhauled nearly the entire ecosystem of crit, sustain, and ADC itemization, and the result was a complete collapse of the role. What exactly changed, you ask? It started with the core items: Infinity Edge, Essence Reaver, Static Shiv, Rapid Fire Cannon. All of them were reworked or had their stats changed. The new Infinity Edge lost its raw damage and began to only double bonus critical damage, no longer the total crit damage. The item's price jumped to 3,700 gold, making it impossible to hit the traditional power spike before the 25-minute mark. Sustain vanished. The old Vampiric Scepter was nerfed, and without healing, without damage, and without defense, ADCs became walking targets. On paper, Riot's intention was to delay the power spike of marksmen to give other classes room to breathe. But in practice, what happened was simple. ADCs just didn't play anymore. Meanwhile, other champions remained untouched. Mid laners could burst effortlessly. Assassins deleted targets in a second. Bruisers tanked, dealt damage, and still walked away alive. And in the bot lane, mages and bruisers started to show up like it was normal. Heimerdinger, Brand, Ziggs, Yasuo, Mordekaiser, champions once considered unfit for the role, were now dominating the meta. The competitive scene reflected this immediately. At MSI 2018, we saw early signs of the crisis, but it was still subtle. Then came patch 8.11, right after the event, and everything collapsed. Heimerdinger became a priority pick across multiple regions. Yasuo bot became meta. Mages like Swain and Vladimir were now being picked as replacements for traditional marksmen. Players started abandoning the role. Rekkles, Fnatic's ADC, and a Worlds 2018 finalist, was even benched in official matches because his classic playstyle no longer had a place. One of the best players in the role at the peak of his career, watching his position be simply removed from the game. And all of this for what? Because Riot decided the game needed to be more diverse. The price? The destruction of an entire class. The community went into meltdown on forums, in videos, on streams. What you saw was a desperate plea. Bring ADCs back. But for weeks, they remained weak. No healing, no damage. Not enough game time to scale. Any mistake was punished instantly. And the worst part? Even if you did everything right, it didn't matter. It was impossible to compete with champions who had impact from level 2. You needed 30 minutes just to start playing. But the game was already decided by minute 15. That was the cruelest irony. ADCs were still fragile, but they had completely lost the reward that once justified that fragility. If you played ADC in 2018, you probably still remember the feeling. The feeling of being completely useless, of loading into a match and thinking, I don't belong here anymore. For many players, patch 8.11 was the breaking point of a feeling that had been building up for a while. The bot lane was no longer their territory. One of the most symbolic moments of this collapse was when Rekkles, Fnatic's star ADC and a Worlds finalist that same year, was benched during official matches. The reason? Simple. The team needed champions like Swain, Yasuo, and Vladimir in the bot lane, and Rekkles wasn't the guy for that. He was a classic player. Tactical, precise, but the game no longer wanted that, and he wasn't the only one. Doublelift, a Team Liquid icon, said in a stream that he had never felt so disconnected from the game. Sneaky from Cloud9 said he had to relearn everything from scratch, and spent weeks playing champions he hated. On Reddit, the community exploded. Posts like ADC is dead and Riot killed it, or thanks for deleting my favorite role, racked up thousands of upvotes. It was collective mourning. And more than that, it was a sense of betrayal. For years, playing ADC was about growth. You struggled early, but then you carried. You knew your value was in the late game. You knew your presence forced the enemy to respect you, or be punished for ignoring you. But with patch 8.11, all of that disappeared. The early game got even worse, the mid game became irrelevant, and the late game often didn't even arrive. The few ADCs that still showed up were the so-called non-traditional ones, like Kai'Sa and Lucian, who could function through hybrid builds or alternative power spikes. But if you were a Jinx main, a Tristana main, Kog'Maw, those players had nowhere left to go. And this wasn't just about balance, this was about identity. Playing ADC was always a strategic and emotional choice. It's the role of control, of responsibility, of coordination. It's you and your support, performing a precise dance in lane. It's surviving while the whole world tries to erase you. But now, the dance became chaos. The carry role was handed over to champions who didn't need to scale, and the ADC became a background character in their own game. The feeling was clear: you'd been excluded, and that exclusion was felt across every level. In solo queue, where trying to play seriously was punished by lack of impact. In pro play, where drafts stopped respecting the role. Even in ranked games where players simply stopped picking ADC. Worse, they stopped protecting them, stopped playing around them, stopped caring. During that time, the most common phrase on streams and forums was always the same: if you're still playing ADC, good luck. Patch 8.11 wasn't just a disastrous update. It was a turning point, a violent reminder that nothing in League of Legends is permanent, not even a role that carried the game for nearly a decade. Until that moment, playing ADC followed a clear path of development to farm well, scale, reach late game as the primary damage carry. That logic had been present since the game's earliest days. It defined not only playstyles, but the identity of millions of players. ADC was, for many, the silent protagonist of every match, the one who suffers early but decides the ending. But that changed, and it changed brutally. Patch 8.11 dismantled that narrative, not through a single rework, but through a design philosophy that revealed something much bigger. In League, what matters today can be discarded tomorrow. And that realization, as uncomfortable as it is also freeing, because it shatters an illusion. The illusion that the game will always respect those who dedicate themselves to a single role, or that Riot will protect the classic pillars of gameplay. After the collapse of ADCs, one thing became clear: the game isn't built to preserve your comfort. It's built to evolve, to break patterns, to shake the foundation, sometimes a little too much. And that teaches something valuable. You learn that survival isn't about mechanical mastery, it's about adaptability. Those who understood this back then grew as players, not because they learned to play mages in the bot lane, but because they learned to see the meta as a volatile ecosystem. Players started studying the game differently, looking beyond buffs and nerfs, spotting systemic trends, changes in gold economy, adjustments to power spike timing, a new logic of lane priority. This created a new mindset, that being a main is useful, but locking yourself into a single role is strategic suicide. Patch 8.11 also served to highlight another critical point. Riot isn't balancing the game for you. They're balancing it for the spectacle, for novelty, for diversity, often at the expense of stability. You might hate that, but if you understand how it works, you can use it to your advantage. That's exactly what many players did. They expanded their champion pools, reworked their builds, started to experiment, and when ADCs finally returned to the meta months later, those players were stronger than ever because they didn't wait for Riot to fix the problem. They reinvented themselves before the game changed again. That's the greatest benefit of living through a meta collapse. You learn that being a League player is, above all, about being flexible, not just in champions, but in mindset. You start to think strategically. You read patch notes with a colder eye. You realize that power spike isn't just a fancy term, it's a timer that decides whether you'll play or be played. You start asking the questions most players ignore. Will this build still be viable next patch? Is this playstyle too dependent on a single item? Does this role have protection against obsolescence? These aren't technical questions, they're philosophical within the game, and only those who lived through a crisis like patch 8.11 truly understand that. The players who learned to play Swain, Brand, Yasuo, and Mordekaiser in the bot lane didn't want those picks, but they discovered something. Control doesn't come from resisting change. Control comes from anticipating it. So yes, the patch that killed ADCs was also the patch that showed the path to becoming a complete player. A player who not only understands the current game, but is ready for the next collapse, because it will happen again. And next time, it might be your role that disappears. The question is, will you see it coming, or realize it too late? If there's one certainty in League of Legends, it's that the meta will shift. And most of the time, it won't warn you. It'll hit you full force. It'll erase your favorite champion. It'll bury the playstyle you spent years mastering. That's what patch 8.11 taught us. That there's no comfort zone in a game designed to constantly reinvent itself. So, if you want to survive, more than that, if you want to stay relevant, there's only one solution. Become the kind of player Riot can't break. And how do you do that? For one, stop being a main of a role. Be a main of a way of thinking. Most people define themselves as ADC main, jungle main, mid main. But the players who survive meta shifts think in terms of function and impact, not lane or favorite skin. Ask yourself, what role does my champion fulfill? What does my team need from me at 15 minutes? What happens if I don't scale? That kind of thinking is what separates silver from master, not raw mechanics. You could master two different playstyles no matter what lane you play. You need two completely different identities within it. If you're an ADC, have a scaling playstyle, Jinx or Kog'Maw, but also one focused on early pressure or mid-game power spikes, like Lucian or Kai'Sa. If you're a support, have an enchanter, Janna or Lulu, but also an engager, Nautilus and Alistar or even Leona. If your entire role vanishes in a patch, like ADCs did in 8.11, you'll still have something to fall back on. Stop skimming patch notes. Study them like a battlefield map. Most players read patch notes with the wrong mindset. They just want to know if their champion got buffed or nerfed. But the real insight is between the lines. Pay close attention to the following: changes in itemization, especially gold cost, power spike timing, and sustain. Adjustments to runes or to the XP and gold systems. Champions that were buffed outside of their usual lane. Those are the invaders of your territory. Because in the end, patch 8.11 didn't kill ADCs just by changing crit damage. It killed them by shifting gold timing, by changing the game's rhythm, by altering the way the map breathed. And if you had known this beforehand, you would have been better prepared. Develop meta awareness, not just gameplay awareness. The meta is a system. It's a conversation between all champions, not just one lane. Learn to ask yourself, which lane is setting the pace of the game right now? Who's strong? Who's getting pushed out? What kind of champions are dominating, and what does that mean for me? That kind of reading is your true invisible MMR. Those who understand the meta climb before everyone else. Those who ignore it get punished, even when they play well. And above all, never underestimate the possibility that the game will change again. Because it will. Riot has already proven it's not afraid to erase champions, roles, even entire design philosophies. Are you still hoping your playstyle will keep working, or have you already started preparing for the next reset? If you want a practical challenge, here it is. Pick two champions outside your comfort zone, one burst, one DPS, and learn the basics with them over the next 7 days. Not to climb, but to learn how to think differently. The best way to protect yourself from the next 8.11 is to become a player who can move faster than the meta. If you learn this now, you'll never be caught off guard again. And when everyone else is complaining about the next big change, you'll already have adapted before it arrives. That was the collapse of ADCs in 2018, but maybe more important than understanding the past is deciding whether you'll be the next to disappear with it. So the real question is, will you sit and wait for your champion to vanish? Or will you become the kind of player that can't be deleted?